I woke up this morning, none of the news was good. Death machines were rolling across the ground where Jesus stood. And the man on the TV told me it had always been that way, and there was nothing anyone could do or say. And I almost listened to him, and I almost lost my mind, and I regained my senses again. Looked into my heart to find that I believe there'll come a day when the children of Abraham will lay down their swords forever in Jerusalem. Maybe I'm only dreaming, maybe I'm just a fool, but I don't remember learning how to hate in Sunday school. And somewhere along the road I strayed, and I never looked back again. But I still find some comfort now and then, and the guns are gunning again, and I can't lay me down, and the thunder is thundering again, and I can't stand the sound, and I believe there'll come a day when the lion and the lamb will lay down in peace together in Jerusalem. There will be no barricades then, there will be no wire walls, and we can wash this blood from our hands and this hatred from our hearts. And I believe that one fine day all the children of Abraham will lay down their swords forever in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, 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 Jerusalem. Hi, everybody. My name is Dean Stevens. I am called Administrator and Music Director at Community Church. We welcome you here. It is an honor to be hosting this event. I always kind of look around for books just to do an introduction, and I found two that would be perfect. I don't know if you saw, but there's a book that's called The 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. Magnificent book, the Edward Said Professor of Arab Studies at Columbia University. It just so happens that Joe Biden was photographed coming out of a bookstore carrying this book that's in our library. Can we hope that he might read it? Can we hope that it would make a difference well, it's too late, but that was an amazing thing. It was upside down, I think, in his hand.
He thought it was in favor of making war on Palestine.
He thought it was in favor of making war on Palestine, is what Mark says. It kind of reminded me of another book that we have in our library, and we have a lot of books by this author because I'm obsessed with him. His name is Eduardo Galeano, and he's from Uruguay. And this book is called The Open Veins of Latin America. And just by coincidence, there was another presidential story about this, where Hugo Chavez gave this book to Barack Obama when they were both happened to be at the UN for some kind of thing. I imagine Barack Obama never read The Open Veins of Latin America either. So that's the first two books I wanted to talk about. The next one is Gaza, an inquiry into It's Martyrdom by Norman Finkelstein, and I talk about this book because he will be joining us on January 17th, virtually, and we're really looking forward to that. I also want to tell you about another January event, January 31st. Mohammad Marandi from Iran will be joining us. These are both just really key speakers on this crisis of this moment right now. Norman Finkelstein and Mohammad Marandi. Mohammad Marandi will be at 11 a.m. for the reason that it's Tehran where he's located, and it would be 3 a.m. Where we're located. But that didn't stop Mazin Qumsiyeh one time from joining us at 3 a.m. so we could do a 7 p.m. event when he was not able to travel. That was really a remarkable sacrifice that he lost that sleep on our behalf. We've had Mazin a number of times, and it's always just a pleasure and a privilege and an honor. And so that's what I want to say to welcome you to Community Church, and thank you for that lovely Shabbat that we just enjoyed together, and thank the Gralta Foundation for the lovely catering, and thank you all for being here. We have a mailing list, and we have newsletters that tell you about upcoming events like the ones I just announced to you. So I just want to hand it over to Mazin and Mark.
Well, I'll let Mark get started since I've already spoken earlier.
Mazin's already been speaking for quite some time, I think, so I'll give you a little bit of a break. First, I want to thank JVP, If Not Now, and the Workman's Circle for sponsoring this event, and Community Church for hosting. What I suggested to Mazin was that we not hold forth, but that we sort of do this. We're sort of set up like a talk show here, right? I don't know what to say. I don't know what to talk about. I want to know what you're here for. And so questions, you can give a mini lecture if you want, but try to make it a question, right? And let's see what we're here for and what we want to talk about tonight. I will just say two quick things. One is, I do want to acknowledge the presence of a couple of people here. One is my wife and my brilliant granddaughter, who is a student at BU, who publicized this thing all over BU, and was hoping that maybe one or two of her professors would come. She's a student of international affairs, and she's been studying Arabic for years, and I won't jinx it by saying she applied for a Fulbright to spend the next year in the Middle East, so we're in West Asia, excuse me, East Asia. Great.
I'm not a faculty.
Terrific. I also want to thank Steve Lowe and Gralta for, Steve's getting me into all kinds of trouble this weekend, so it's great to see Steve again. He loves to get people in trouble and to make good trouble. Steve mentioned Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Holocaust Memorial. I don't like the term the Holocaust with the definite article and the capital H. I try to find all kinds of ways to talk about what happened then differently, the Nazi genocide, whatever. My story is that I was born to a traditional Jewish family in Philadelphia in 1948. It's a small miracle that they didn't name me Israel. I was born in April. If I had been born in May, they would have maybe called me Israel. And the very short story is that in my late 50s, I finally went. I'd been to Israel, lived on a kibbutz. I did the whole thing. If you're born into a Jewish family in 1948 in the United States, and it's an identified Jewish family, you're raised in a very potent combination of rabbinical Judaism and political Zionism. The things they're just like, it's like this, right? And I bought it all. What was not to buy about how wonderful and special we were and how I'd been blessed to have been born at a time when my people had been redeemed from 2,000 years of suffering. Something inside me never bought this as a basis for an identity, that the rest of the world hated me. And in particular, I had two enemies that I had to particularly hate and fear. One was the German people for what they did to us, all of them. And one was the Arabs because of what they would do to us if we didn't have Israel. Something inside me, to my Christian friends, I always say, by the grace of God, I never bought it, so I found myself in my late 50s on my way to Palestine to meet this purported enemy. I was ready. And for me, the rest is history. That totally changed my life. So I went on a trip with the Fellowship of Reconciliation in 2006. And we went to Israel and to the West Bank and met all the people we needed to meet. It was my dream trip. And one of the stops was Yad Vashem. And this was, we were there for maybe 10 days. This was a couple days in. So I'd already been to the West Bank, up and down the West Bank. I saw it. And I was kind of in pieces about it. Like, whoa, okay, this is what I'd come to see. So how many of you have ever been to Yad Vashem? Of course, there's a Jewish audience. Right? So the parking lot, right? There's this big sort of archway with a big, I don't know what to call it, but it's huge letters, and it's from Ezekiel 37. The valley of the vision of the valley of the dry bones. I will pick you up, I will breathe life into you, and you will live, and I will set you down on your land. This is the first thing you see with Yad Vashem. That's the whole agenda. We're here. And I was rooted to the spot. I thought, okay. So that was Yad Vashem for me. The other thing is that I met the Palestinian Christians, and I just want to say also, I want to acknowledge the presence of a friend and mentor. Dick Horsley retired from teaching at the University of Massachusetts here in Boston. And Dick has written like a bookshelf worth of books about a righteous Jew. Steve mentioned a righteous Jew. There was this righteous Jew, he's from the Galilee, Joshua something from Nazareth, right? He organized a grassroots resistance movement against this big colonial empire during the reign of Tiberius. So, first century, the Common Era. I would like to say Dick introduced me to that Jesus, but it was the Palestinian Christians, and particularly a Palestinian Anglican priest, who introduced me to Jesus. And one of the stops, I think after Yad Vashem, was to this group in East Jerusalem called Sabil, which means the way, or the spring of water. And it's Palestinian Christians who developed and practice liberation theology. So we got the whole spiel from them about what it was like to be a Palestinian today. And we were devastated hearing the story. This is a Palestinian woman, Christian, who was living, banished from the neighborhood where my family was now living in West Jerusalem. And I said, Nora, how do you do it? How do you maintain? How do you keep going? The world hates you and loves my people. The world sees you, my people, as the victims and you as the aggressors. Your children are leaving because there's no future for them. And as Christians, they had lots of options. And she said, It's very, very simple. We follow Jesus. Who was he? He was a Palestinian Jew who lived under Roman occupation. And he led a grassroots movement of resistance. Not armed resistance, because Jesus saw that what you get was crucifixions up and down the road, and destroyed, burned, devastated villages. He said, you stay with Torah. The Romans and the occupation, the empire, is trying to take Torah away from us. And Torah is a civil code. It's a lot of other things, but it's a civil code about how to create a just society based on community, sharing, care and compassion for the vulnerable. That's how you resist. You don't let them take it away from you with tribute and with taxes and with armies. She said, it's the same thing now. Empires come and empires go. We follow Jesus. We're here. Just amazing. So I came back to bring this message to my Jewish community. It was like, whoa, there is another story here, folks. If we don't figure this out, if we don't learn this other story, we are done for. We're already so deep into it now, I don't even know how we're going to dig ourselves out. Needless to say, the doors of the synagogues and the organized Jewish community did not fling open and welcome. It was slammed in my face, and that was an injury. That was hard, still is. But the doors of the churches, remember, this is FOR. So most of the Christians that we were there make Quakers look like, right-wing nutcases, right? And the doors of those churches flung open. They wanted to hear from a Jew who was ready to tell them what they knew was true and what they needed to hear, but which they felt they could not say. So I said I got my marching orders. So that was 20 years ago, and my life hasn't been the same since. That's me, that's my journey. That's all I have to say right now. I don't know what to say now at this moment, and I could go on for hours, but I don't know where to start. That's why what I suggested to Mazin was, and he's been talking for 2 hours anyway, that I would like to hear what people want to talk about, what questions they have, what heartbreak they want to share, anger, puzzlement, fear. One thing I do know is that, if it's not clear to any of us today sitting here in the United States of America at the end of 2024, this is a lot bigger than Palestine. You unpack Palestine, you unpack the whole story. And I think we have to talk about that here. Not only because we need to advocate with our government, but because it's our story too. More and more. We can't say, oh, those poor people there, they're occupied. Christian, fascism is taking over. Colonialism is in charge. Guess what? That's what I think we need to talk about.
Thank you, Mark. I don't know if this microphone is working. Or I will just be very brief. I think there are two roads that we can take. Each individual here can be on one of those two roads. And one road, we know the outcome of it already, and it's already beginning to manifest big time with genocide, ecocide, scholasticide, and veriticide. We can say that death of truth, the way that the powers, the empire is telling us lies and getting away with it and getting millions of people to vote for lies, basically, and lessers of two evils. And that road will lead us down the cliff like the lemmings, basically, either by climate change or by nuclear war. And maybe the planet will be better off without us anyway. Cockroaches will be survivors and nuclear holocaust that's coming upon us. So that's one road that we have traveled it for maybe longer than what we should, and maybe it's too late. In many ways, that's what I hear in the voice of you, Mark. That it's really depressing. That's one road. The other road, which many of us, including you and I and all the people here, have been pushing for. Sometimes we get tired, sometimes we get excited, sometimes we donate money, sometimes we go out protest, sometimes we get arrested pushing for that road, and that's the road of sustainability and of human and natural communities in this planet, and a future for the planet that includes our civilization, includes Homo sapiens in its present form, although I'm not sure why Linnaeus called us Homo sapiens. He was too optimistic. Maybe he should have called us Homo idioticus or something. But anyway, that's the second road. So what's the probability of each road happening or leading us in the future? Sure. If you were to ask me as a scientist, I would say, like Gramsci said, if I have pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So intellectually, I would say the first road is 70% probability of happening. That's a road of doom and gloom, if you want. And the second probability is maybe 30%, maybe even less, maybe 20%, if one is to be really pessimistic. But anyway, 20% or 30% is not a bad odds to work with. So certainly better than the lottery, 1 in 10 million or something, and still people go and buy lottery tickets or go gambling at casinos and enrich very wealthy Zionists. But anyways, this is something we will keep moving in that road. And I would say, as a scientist, if we fail, if we don't succeed in convincing enough lemmings to turn around, and we all end up over the cliff, at least I can say in that last day when I see the mushroom clouds that I have tried my best. I have worked my ass off, and I am satisfied with my conscience. That's all I want to say, and then open it up for discussion.
Hi, Mark. I'm mostly focused on the mainstream Jewish community, as Mazin knows. And let's put it this way here, the mainstream Jewish community. I think we need to be focused on how to reach the mainstream Jewish community so that people aren't so afraid to engage in dialogue, to invite a person to come to a synagogue. I tried to arrange Mazin to come to TBZ in August of 2023. I failed for whatever reason. The rabbi sounded well-intended. So what are your, how do you feel about that? Because one thing that was that the North American Jewish Federation, when they had their meeting, I think it was a Zoom meeting, they purposely did not invite Benjamin Netanyahu to speak at that, and I'm sure of that. So, any thoughts?
That's progress. Sorry, what's your name again?
Evelyn.
Emily. Evelyn. Do you attend a synagogue? Are you a member of which one? Mishkan. That's in. Oh yeah, that's the one. That's the one right on Beacon Street, right? The big one with the kippah. Oh, that's Oave Shalom. Okay. Yeah, right. I remember that. Okay. So let me just start off with, all right, so my beat has been the churches. I've spent the last 18 years talking to Christians, like I said. And day after tomorrow, I'm going to be preaching at a church where Mazin and I met in Old Lyme, Connecticut. I started off giving sermons, preaching on Sunday mornings in churches. And my mother wanted me to be a rabbi. This is the closest she was ever going to get. But I loved it because, it turns out I'm a preacher. I love text. I love homiletics. The thing is that if you're preaching in the church, you get, they said, well, we follow a text. I said, I grew up in a synagogue. I know what you have to follow a text when you preach on Shabbos, right? By the way, Shabbat Shalom. And so, I know that. Well, we have this thing called a lectionary. So you got the Old Testament, you got the Gospels, you got the Epistles, you got a Psalm. This is a candy store. And so it's been wonderful. And I started to get this question when after the services, which is, you get Jesus better than our pastor. When did you convert? I said, well, I get Jesus because he was the best Jew. I can't believe they hid him from me all those years. It was clear to me. I mean, I get him. He's right down the line with the prophets, except that he did what the prophets were never quite able to do, which is to step out of the tribal framework and say, hey, if this is for real, this is for everybody. What don't you get about that? Well, we know what that's about. And Christians know what that's about, too, because they suffer from the same exceptionalism as Jews do, and, Muslims or anybody, and or Americans. Right? So this is, when did you convert? I said, well, I didn't know how to answer the question. I finally got my answer. My answer is, I don't know what that would mean, but I wish things had gone differently in the first century so I wouldn't have to be answering the damn question.
And that Jesus had been included in the book of prophets.
Well, I mean, there was what they call the fateful parting. Lenny Bruce has this joke. He says, he talked a lot about anti-Semitism. He said, people say, you killed Jesus. I said, listen, in the basement of our house, growing up, there's a box you're not supposed to open. You open up the box, and in it there's a note that says, yeah, we did it. And that's kind of true, right? They gave him to the Romans, who executed him as a political dissident, but it was a Jewish elitist, senior moment. What do you call it? It was a theocracy, and they were absolutely complicit with the empire and with the occupiers. And they said, we've got to get rid of this guy. He's messing up our deal. So that's the story. So anyway, I digress. So the Christians that I spoke to, the people in the churches, I would tell them this. I would say, look, you got to get your own house in order. Don't convert. We need you as a Jew to keep saying these things. I said, look, I'll take the job. I accept the assignment. I understand where this is coming from. But I pray for the day when you don't need a Jew's permission to be a faithful follower of Jesus. Get your own house in order, because I will tell you, I know where you're at. You're ready to do this, but you don't want to do it without the Jews walking with you, side by side, like Joshua holding up the and I said, I get that. I get how guilty you feel. I get how nervous you feel. I get how conflicted you feel. If you wait for the Jewish community to join with you on this, you will wait too long. We will be the last kicking and screaming to be dragged into this struggle. I'm sorry, but that's what I feel. Yeah, but the thing is that okay, you want to talk about psyche. Okay. Well, that's the problem. That, yes, and that's why I finally left the synagogue and spent the rest of my time speaking in Germany, who loved me. Germans are crazy for this topic because they have to be relieved from their guilt and their trauma. Crazy for this. I was embraced by them, just like I was embraced by progressive Christians here. I wanted to join the world. I did not want to be in the psychological prison that I grew up in, this exception. And I was a macher, big time. So much reward for being the perfect Jewish kid. And, you know, thank goodness. But my first career, my former life, I was a clinical psychologist. And my specialty was post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay? So Ilan Pappé's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, the last two chapters are brilliant. They're analytical, and one of them is called Fortress Israel. That says it, okay? So what did we learn working with Vietnam vets and then survivors of sexual abuse, people suffering from domestic abuse, etc.? We learned that the real injury, after the symptoms of numbness and hyperarousal wear off, which they often will, the real injury to sufferers of PTSD is a deep soul injury. It's the loss of trust and the ability to connect. And that's what kills you if you can't figure out a way to heal from that. And so I didn't do this work, but we figured out you get Vietnam vets together, you get survivors of sexual abuse together in groups. They're all together, normalizing what they're all experiencing, realizing they're not sick, and learning there are other people who are suffering just like you. Otherwise, you never escape from the isolation and the soul death of being no longer able to connect. Okay, we know that that's the treatment. Learn, you acknowledge your scars and your pain, but learn to trust again and open up to the world again. The treatment that is not indicated is put people inside the wall that they've already built for themselves because the world's not safe. Put soldiers along the wall and then look back inside the wall and say, it's dangerous out there. They all want to kill you. Trust us. We'll protect you. Trust no one except your own tribe and your own group. That's Israel. That psychologically is the Jewish people today. And I don't know how to fix that. The only thing, my strategy, my organizing strategy, and this is what I'm telling all the Christians, is we need to deconstruct that prison that the Jews have built for themselves. And there are Jews, Israeli Jews, not many anymore. The joke is there are 50 left-wing organizations in Israel. It's the same 50 people. Okay? They're probably down to 3 or 4 now. They're saying, we can't fix it from inside. You have to save us by taking this sucker down. So he said, it has to happen. Yeah, same thing. We have to do it here. Just like the South Africans, they say, we had the ANC, they were doing better than Israel. There is no ANC. There's no political party. There's no armed struggle inside Israel. And Israel's done a much better job of trying to keep the Palestinians from having an armed struggle. Thank God they're figuring it out finally. But they say, when you isolated South Africa, when you boycotted them, when you stopped them from, when you barred them from participating in international rugby competitions, it's probably even worse than the economic sanctions. Watch what happened. That's what we have to do to Israel. We have to make it impossible for them to govern anymore. Then, if and when there's some sort of radical political change, then maybe the Palestinians and the Israelis will have a chance to create whatever it is that they can create. But this thing, first of all, has to go. I think that's what we have to do. I think as long as the American public is waiting for the Jewish community, 2% of the population here is waiting for the Jews to come around and say, we'll do it when the Jewish community is ready to do it. That is not going to work. And that, you know, it's painful to say that, right? I do not agree with Mark Ellis. He says, we are exiles from the Jewish community. I do not feel that I am an exile from the Jewish community. I may be a small minority, but I'm not an exile. None of us are. I'm sorry? Oh, well, there's a lot of hands. Yeah.
The irony is that in Israel, they have they say, well, we're going to wait. We're going to treat the trauma before it becomes PTSD. So you have all these psychologists around Israel so focusing on how to treat. So that means there is the brain power to do it. It's the willpower. And so anyway, I wanted to say...
But the Israeli psychologists and the good people from the United States, Jewish or whatever, they want to go there and try to treat people, right? You've got to get rid of the system that's making them sick from childhood, from the cradle. From the cradle, they're being damaged. And so now you have Israeli kids, young men, maybe some women as well, who are making videos from Gaza, big smiles on their faces, showing the rubble of the school or the hospital that they just destroyed, singing patriotic songs, okay? This is a deeply, deeply, deeply troubled society. Deeply troubled. One more little story. I met a Palestinian woman in Ramallah who was the head of Mercy Corps. This is back in 2007. In 2008, so Gaza had just been bombed with one of the first cycles of things. She was talking about it. She said she commutes from East Jerusalem to Ramallah every day, back and forth. She lived in East Jerusalem in one of those. And if you take that road north, to your left, to the west, is the wall that they were just building. She commutes there with her, at the time, her 8-year-old daughter. One day her daughter turns to her and says, Mommy, why did they make the Jews live behind that wall? She told me this story, the mother. She wanted me to I tell this story all the time. And I feel this way. The Palestinians will get their liberation. They know who they are. They're getting ripped off. And now they're being genocided, but they know who they are. And I will tell you, the Palestinians that I knew do not hate, they do not fear. They hurt. Not true on the other side of that wall. Those are the true spiritual and psychological victims. At least I shouldn't say that. Obviously, all are victims.
That was very powerful. Yeah, I just feel a sense of horror, sorrow, and outrage I lived in Jerusalem when I was very young for like a year, and probably the reason that I've always been open to Palestinians is that my father, most of the abuse that I experienced came from within my family. So I knew about outside anti-Semitism, but it wasn't direct. And so because my father would tell me that Israel was taking good care of the Palestinians, I was like, oh my God, this is really a terrible, horrifying situation. But I wonder, I mean, I hear about wanting to reach the mainstream Jewish community. I mean, I had one friend say with the sanctuary movement, okay, when the people lead, the leaders will follow. So first the outsiders in the Jewish community started doing sanctuary, and then other people, then it happened. I don't know what it's going to take, but I just, it's just heartbreaking to me that I'm listening to you, Mazin, and I feel like I'm listening to a Jew from the 1930s and 40s telling us what's going on in Nazi Germany in real time. It's like, I don't know how to, and people keep, they'll tell you you're a traitor and you're a traitor and all, you're a traitor and you're a treasonous and you're an enemy of the Jewish people and all kinds of, I just feel like people are being deluded. This is delusional. This is not, how can we be, it's just unbearable to me that this is being done to protect Jews. We're killing people. Everyone is equally precious. And I'm not sure the way out of it. I don't know the answer, but it's just, I just want to wake people up that there's an insanity going on here. Insanity to stop this.
Mazin?
So, Mark, I think your references to South Africa are very important, and I think we're not spending enough time upholding boycott, divestment, and sanctions in this country. And I want to talk. I just want to give something that made me realize this in a very strong way. I only recently read Pape's book, The Ethnic Cleansing. I was really struck. So my mother was a Holocaust refugee from Vienna. My grandfather and my great-grandfather both ran businesses in Vienna and both lost those businesses in 1938. Pape makes a point in the book about the thousands of Palestinian businesses that were expropriated in a similar way just 10 years later in 1948. And it pained me to my very core. But what it also said to me is that we have to really start talking about the right of return. We have to start defending the right of return, because this problem is not, it's not going to be solved without the right of return. And I got my Austrian citizenship back just a couple years ago. I'm actually going to Austria next week with my new Austrian passport. And that is a little bit of my right of return, but I think I'd love for both of you to comment on this, because I think we're not spending, there's a lot of, the fear people have in this country about BDS is all around the right of return, and that it's going to, that the Jews are going to be a minority. It's the same fear that's driving white supremacy in this country, as people of color become, are becoming a majority here. It's the same dynamic. So we have to confront this head on, I think, if we're not. And so I would love to hear both of you, what you think about my idea that we have to uphold the right of return and start fighting for it publicly and explicitly.
No, you want to talk about BDOs?
About what?
Yeah, go.
No, I mean, if I got I didn't get the whole question, but if it's about the issue of fear, I think, the way the systems work for humans, is if they think tribally and they take on some aspect, most Zionists were not Holocaust survivors or anything like that. Most leading Zionists were actually collaborators with Hitler in the early stages of Nazism. And but they take on the collectiveness, collective ideas of a community, and they say this is our community and there's these Gentiles who don't like us, so might as well be very tough, because that's the only way we can survive in this tough world. As I keep saying, tough neighborhood even. We're not living in Switzerland or something, we're living in the Middle East where these people are out to kill us. So the use of fear as tactic is something that is understandable, considering the history and all of this stuff. But just about every racist movement on earth have used fear in the past. I mean, even Hitler and his gangs, they said there's this Jewish cabal that's taken over the world, and we are being threatened and our economy is being devastated because of this cabal. This is the kind of attitude of what I call it superiority-inferiority complex. Now, Mark is more of a psychologist than I am, and I'm not going to analyze, but I think this is a problem and we have to deal with it. Not that it's really our problem. I mean, we Palestinians did not cause the German Holocaust or any of this stuff. It's not really our duty to deal with victimization that happened in Europe. And incidentally, it happened after the Zionists were well established in Palestine, not before. It was not a cause of the establishment of the State of Israel. The State of Israel was established, actually the date should be 1921, because that's when the first Jewish Zionist ruler of Palestine, his name is Herbert Samuel, was appointed by the British, and he segregated schools, for example, and instituted the first apartheid laws as a British agent, but he was representative of the Zionist movement. He represented the Zionists at the Paris meetings in 1919. So I think, this predates what happened in Nazi Germany or Eastern Europe and all of that stuff. So the question really about fear is a question that I struggled with when I wrote about the subject of colonization and mental colonization, both for Palestinians and for Israelis, for Jews, for Zionists. I try to identify what is this, how do you dissolve this fear? And what I arrived at is it can only be done internally, and that's why the work of Mark is very important, of course. His books and others, of course, like that have written. And if it is not an incurable disease, okay? There's people like you and Mark and many others who have transcended this and widened their circle and stopped thinking tribally and started thinking as humans. And I think the fact that so many Jews have escaped that bondage, if you want, that is a size for us Palestinians. That's a very optimistic aspect. It adds to why I said 30% chance, not 1% chance. There is that element, and for us to liberate our minds is the most important aspect. And if it's doable, and obviously doable, even leading Zionists have, like Abraham Berg, who was Speaker of the Knesset, is now considers himself a post-Zionist. that tells you something, and we must encourage this trend, and we must work on it. But it's not an easy road, and it certainly is something that we all should work on our own minds and hearts to enlarge our circles and not think in any tribal fashion.
I would just briefly, I think BDS is one of the most important things that we have. There are some differences with the South African example. The economic sanctions really did make a difference, especially when people figured out how to close off the Swiss bank accounts of the Pretoria government. But they made it impossible for South Africa to govern, and a lot of that was economic pressure. There's no way that BDS is going to bring down the Israeli economy. It's at the center of the whole neoliberal order. South Africa was an economic political backwater, and probably one of the more important factors, besides the economic pressure and the sanctions, was the end of the Cold War, where at which point both the Thatcher and the Reagan governments didn't have to stand behind South Africa as a bastion against communism, and the ANC were all communists and all that. When that was over, that removed a major barrier. So we're not going to bring Israel down economically. I think one of the more important aspects of BDS is that it is bringing the attention of the world to what's wrong with Israel. Because people say, why are we boycotting Israel? I thought they were the good guys. And it's been a huge impact on the churches. I mean, most now, it's been going on for 20 years now, most of them, the major Protestant denominations in this country and the smaller peace churches, etc., have now officially endorsed BDS. It took them decades to do that and to get past the church hierarchies, but the pressure from the grassroots of the church has finally prevailed. That's very, very important. Really, really changed hearts and minds. And that has to continue. And we know BDS is working because now the powers that be here in the United States are trying to make it illegal. I said, yes, okay, it's working. So I think we need to keep that up because it really does, it really, really increases awareness. And the politicians, you know, if at some point the political calculus changes and it becomes, Israel becomes a political liability in Washington, then, you know, they'll drop Israel in a minute, like a hot potato. And as soon as the United States abandons Israel, it's over. We have the power here. I'm not quite sure how it's going to happen. We have to do everything. We have to hammer on the doors, bang on the doors of our elected representatives. They need to hear from us. When I lived in Washington, that's what we heard, not from the representatives themselves, but from their staffers. They said, we're hearing from the other side. You better believe it. The senator or the congressperson needs to hear from you. Keep doing that because that's how politics works, right? The wet finger to the wind. Which way is it blowing? So that's important. BDS is important. Hearing from as many Jews as possible is also important. You know, that's the song you sing. They don't speak for me. The Federation doesn't speak for me. The ADL, my God, does not speak for me. You keep saying that. I think and then we just watch. Israel is, like any empire, not really an empire, well, yeah, it's a small empire, is destroying itself from within. Starting the war on all these fronts, Hezbollah is powerful. Powerful. That's why we're so opposed to Iran. Because Iran and Hezbollah are making trouble for Israel. So bring it on. We don't know what's going to finally change things, but it is going to change, and I think we're getting closer to the end. We just don't know how. And everybody says, well, what do you want to see happen? What's your prediction? I said, well, don't believe anybody who tells you how they think this is going to roll out because that person's a fool. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But I think it's just a matter of time before Israel, this crazy self-destructive project, is going to reach its well-deserved end. How bloody it's going to be, how violent it's going to be, don't know. Don't know how much people inside Israel are going to suffer. But frankly, I don't see how they can suffer much more than they're suffering now, because they've got their heads in the sand, they're drinking in cafes in the Tel Aviv boulevards, they're drinking the Kool-Aid that their government is telling them. They're in big trouble. I just pray for that to be over, so we can start all over again. And someday, we, the Jews here, we all understand Zionism. We all understand where that impulse comes from. We feel it in our bones, right? It was an understandable, forgivable, catastrophic wrong turn as a solution to anti-Semitism, right? Someday, we'll be on our knees in contrition for the crimes, the horrible crimes that are being committed in our name. Someday. And I just pray for that day to come sooner rather than later.
I'm going to get a pen and pass Mazin's clipboard around. I think you should all receive Mazin's emails, because they're just remarkable and eloquent.
Yeah, and I'll fetch that list from Mazin, because I finally decided it's time to start a Substack. So, with his permission, with your permission, I'll have him give me the list.
Sorry.
Wait, Barbara, where's the mic? Dean.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, you've got one.
My friend and I are sitting here struggling a little bit with the framing of this conversation, and I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this exactly. I think it seems like a lot of the framing of this conversation has been around the culpability of the Jewish community, and I don't want to, of course, erase. There are many culpable Jewish institutions, many, of course, Jewish supporters of the state of Israel, and I'm not erasing that in any way. But I don't think there's been enough framing in this conversation of, it feels like obscuring the role of the United States government and the very large evangelical and Christian community. I know you've spoken to it, but it just feels like there's been a lot of the Jewish community is holding us back and moving forward, and it feels like that just obscures, that feels like it's playing into empire to say that, well, we're waiting on the Jewish community to move forward. And of course, right, I agree, we have to get our house in order. Of course, there's so many Jews who I would love to change their minds, and I think that's deeply important work. But it feels like to frame this as that is the thing that we need to be focusing on, just it plays into this narrative that obscures the larger forces at play here. And I think there's.
I don't blame the Jewish community.
I don't, and I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but it just felt like a lot of the opening and the framing of this conversation had a very strong focus on that.
I blame Washington. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Amalia. Yeah, I was really aghast when I heard you say that, that the conversation, and maybe I misheard this, I hope so, that you were saying that the conversation that you've been having with other Christians, or perhaps with Jews as well, is that, we are waiting for the 2% of American population who is Jewish to say that we don't want this, and then we can make a difference. And just with a very little bit of internet searching, I'm seeing Christians United for Israel say they have 10 million members in the United States. Just to put that in perspective, there are about 7.5 million Jews in the United States, of which not all identify as Zionist.
So, what are you saying?
I'm saying that I'm feeling a lot of anti-Semitism in this conversation.
Feeling a lot of anti-Semitism.
Yeah. And this is in no way to negate Jewish responsibility for what's happening, Jewish complicity in what's happening. I'm utterly heartbroken and shattered, and I think, and I'm pretty sure that all the Jews in this room are doing everything we can to stop the genocide, right? And we are having those conversations with our family members and our communities. But I just think that this framing is really lacking in the larger power analysis.
Wait, let me just try to unpack this a little bit, what I hear you saying. First of all, I'll say it again, I'm not blaming the Jewish community here in the United States. They're doing, the habit has been, I mean, the ADL and the federations, they were all founded in the beginning of the 20th century to protect Jewish immigrants from anti-Semitism. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism then. So they haven't been able to break the habit. In the 70s, basically Jewish neocons who were concerned that that support for Israel was breaking down, and they were threatened by that, invented the term, the new anti-Semitism, and equated anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Okay? And those guns are being rolled out again big time now. So the first job that we have to do, and Tony Judt was brilliant about this, was to point out to people that the official diplomatic and PR project of the State of Israel, certainly from the late 60s on, was to make sure that nobody in the world at large, but certainly in the United States, would fail to conflate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. That everybody needed to basically believe that all Jews were Zionists, that to be Jewish was to support the State of Israel, that Zionism was Judaism, and the Jewish people and the State of Israel were the same. This was the official policy of the State of Israel. Okay, because they needed American support. So the crazy stuff that's going on about anti-Semitism today, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, is absolutely real. You know, my mother, her biggest question about anything happening in the world was, is it good for the Jews? Right? This is not good for the Jews, because most people believe that Judaism and the State of Israel are the same thing. Ben-Gurion was very smart in naming the country Israel. He wanted people to confuse the Israelites of the Bible with the Israelis of today, the Jews of today. So most people believe that speaking out against Israel, if not actually being anti-Semitic, would sound anti-Semitic, and that's as bad as being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I am an anti-Zionist, proud Jew, right?
Yeah.
I'm not completely Jew. What I'm saying is that focusing the guilt solely on Jews, and as the United States sends billions of dollars of weapons to Israel to support this genocide, right? Focusing solely on Jews as culpable for that, I think is anti-Semitic. I think it is important that we question,
Sure.
that we take responsibility for that. I just think it's really important to recognize the larger context of Christian Zionism in which we are living.
And that the conversation should also be how do we, I think not just, right, how do we change the Jewish community, but how do we change this conversation in the U.S. so that it's not just...
Well, how do we get the ADL and the federations to fold their tents and go home? How do we get the rabbis who don't want to lose their jobs to speak to it from the pulpits? I don't know how we do that.
Mazin would like to say a word.
If you allow me, please, I've come a few thousand miles to be with you guys here. So, I mean, I think a conversation needs to be practical. There is genocide going on here. There's a genocide going on. There's an extermination campaign. And it's the first genocide in human history that's not being done by one government. In this, I agree with you. It is not the responsibility even of the Israeli government and their supporters abroad, the Zionists. There is a number of governments that are fully participating in this genocide, partners in crime. When they do take people to International Criminal Court, it should be also Biden and Kamala Harris and those guys should be also brought under these charges. So, thanks. This is the reality that we Palestinians face. Now, with regard to the US, since I'm also a US citizen, I'm entitled to give my opinion about internal US politics. And in the US, if you look back at the politics of how this evolved, and the first, of course, US big support for Israel came in 1947 when Truman pushed for the partition. Now, why did Truman push for partition? It's a very simple question. Forget the propaganda or what they write to you about why he pushed for transition, because now we have declassified documents that explain why he pushed for transition. When every single member of his cabinet and the intelligence services were all against this idea of creating of a Jewish state because they knew it was going to create destabilization and create hatred and create communal, and also, by the way, create anti-Semitism and foster anti-Semitism. They all advised against it. So, but Truman stood alone, basically, in supporting it. And what he said to them to explain this, in a cabinet meeting, now declassified documents, he says, gentlemen, I know they were all men at the time, of course, all the secretaries. Gentlemen, I know you're all against this, but you have to realize that I was not elected in this office. I inherited this position because my predecessor died in office, and now I'm running for elections, and there's not a large constituency of Arab Americans who's going to ensure my election. So he took that position because there was a constituent that's going to support him in doing this. And the last president, by the way, to really challenge Israel was Eisenhower in 1956, when Israel occupied the Sinai and the Gaza Strip. And he picked up the phone, called the Israeli prime minister and said, I expect you to withdraw promptly. That's his words. And they withdrew. They withdrew. Even though Britain and France were supportive of Israel in that war. The US exerted power up to that point. AIPAC was founded in 1957. That's a year of my birth, so I remember it. And why 1957? Because they knew that we cannot afford this. We cannot afford to have a president challenge us. And it takes a while to build such institutions, powerful institutions that are fairly organized. And by the way, I don't think J Street is an answer to AIPAC. I think J Street and AIPAC are one and the same, just different brands of Zionism. But anyway, AIPAC took a while to pick up steam, and really until after 1967, when they really had a major say in US foreign policy, so that now the State Department largely works under the direction from Tel Aviv more than they work under directions from Washington. And the evidence for that is overwhelming, Now I tell you this, Kennedy himself tried to challenge AIPAC, by the way, and failed. And he was also assassinated, of course, so that ended that possibility of a challenge to AIPAC. He wanted them to register as a foreign lobby. But anyways, I tell you this because, yes, there is a responsibility for those who support Zionism, because, as Steve told me even several times during this trip, they are going to create this backlash that we call anti-Semitism. they are going to cause you more headaches than you ever imagined possible. And it's really for how do I call it, a foolish cause that is not going to succeed, period. I am 100% sure that Zionism is already failed, past tense, not future tense. It failed, for example, look at the population between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. There are about 14.5 million people. 52% of them are non-Jewish. 52% under Israeli control. That is not the success of Zionism when their original plan was Nile to the Euphrates, Jewish state, pure Jewish state. That was the vision. They have failed. And why did they fail? They failed for many reasons. One is because the idea is stupid, as Mark well articulates. You know, maybe good intention, I don't care, but it's stupid in the sense that, you know, to guarantee Jewish safety, we have to have Jewish power by kicking out another people who had nothing to do with persecuting us over the ages, but nevertheless, we want that land, we want a Jewish state, and those people have to go. So this is a foolish idea. As one time Jeff Halper in front of the United Nations, he explained why he came to Israel as a Zionist. He immigrated and acquired Israeli citizenship immediately, like all Jews can. And he said, I have slowly changed my views. And he's still changing, by the way. That's another story we can talk about. But anyways, the reason I changed, this is his words, the reason I changed is because Zionists lied to us. They told us that doing this will keep us safe, will produce safety. Whereas today, this is Jeff Halper's word, today Jews in Berlin are safer than Jews in Tel Aviv. And this was before the development of drones and missiles and hypersonic missiles and all of this stuff. I mean, think about it. How can you have safety? How can you have safety by oppressing another people? It doesn't work. It never will work. So it's already a failure from its beginning, from its inception as a concept, it's failure. And what we have to do, Jews, non-Jews, Christians, Muslims, my family is Christian, by the way, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Baha'i, Druze, atheists, we should all work together to awaken the population that's brainwashed, whether here. And American Jews, by the way, who are supportive of Zionism, are worse than Israeli Jews who were born there, in terms of their radicalism, in terms of their stupidity level of, and I debated many of them, including Morton Klein, head of the Zionist Organization of America. And I'm happy to debate any leading Zionist anywhere in public they choose. All of the ones I debated, leading Zionists, refused to debate me again because they lose the argument. They don't have logic. They don't have logic behind them. They have emotion and they have fear. That's why I started to answer the other thing about fear. And you're right about BDS. It's a method of education. It's a tool. But in South Africa also, it was not an economic strangulation. I disagree with you on this. In South Africa, it was also the psychological pressure. South African economy, if you look at the numbers, was strongest just before apartheid ended. It was not weak economy. And even though there was boycotts, there are ways around boycotts. We know boycotts don't work economically. IBM was the biggest company at the time that decided to stop selling computers and stuff to South Africa. But South Africa was not short on computers. No problem. You import them to a nearby African country and you bring them with trucks around the boycott. You know, even now, you know, Israel, there is the Houthis blocking trade to Israel. Is Israel short on anything? No, there is a passage now they are getting from United Arab Emirates, you know, ports through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan to Haifa. So Israel is not going to go down economically. But Israel will go down psychologically and morally, and by the work of people like Mark and you and everybody else who work in a way that's ultimately it's for the best of the Israelis. Maybe they don't know this, like alcohol, drug addicts, they don't know what's best for them. So they keep juggling, you know, and we have to awaken them that this is not good for them. It's not for their future. And that's what I work on. I work with Israelis to convince them. I was arrested actually more than a dozen times. Half the times I was arrested with Israeli Jews that were standing with me in front of bulldozers. So there is some awakening. We just need more of it. Thanks.
I wanted to respond to something Mark said before about lobbying our representatives and their staff. That's been done. They know the facts. There's money, whether it's from AIPAC or J Street or billionaire Jewish donors. We've lobbied Catherine Clark, who's second in the Democratic Party. She's our rep in the 5th District. And when you either speak to the staff or write to her, the comment is, you know, if the bill comes to the floor, I'll think about it. Mm-hmm. We were lobbying on the Defense for Children Palestine, the act, for years. And her staff knows, and she knows what's going on. And if it comes to the floor, there are 30 sponsors, it's never coming to the floor, then I'll think about it. These people know exactly what's going on, and are just too chicken shit to do what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Although,
Go ahead, get some more.
Let's go get back to her.
Hi, I had a question for Mazin. The reason I came tonight in a large part is because I really wanted to hear from you about the environment in the West Bank and in Palestine and the impacts of the occupation and the impacts of the genocide on the environment, because that's something that, honestly, before learning about your work, I was not in the front of my mind, which is crazy. I'm an ecologist. I mean, it just wasn't something I was thinking about. And so I was wondering if Mazin could speak about ecocide, which he mentioned earlier, and the impacts of the occupation and the genocide on the environment.
We're giving you exercise, Dean. Look, this is another reason why I think it's urgent for all of us to be working to change minds and hearts and apply the maximum pressure we can on all governments and all entities, whether they're Israeli or American or British or whatever, who are supporting this genocide. They are supporting this genocide because they, as Mark pointed out, and as you are all very well familiar with, because of money. Because, I mean, for all wars, you follow the money. You see where the money is coming from. Israel is now exporting the gas of Gaza to Europe to replace Russian gas that used to flow across the Nord Stream pipelines, 2 of them that blew up mysteriously. You know, all the Western intelligence agencies cannot tell us who did this ghastly deed. But anyways, it's all about money. Of course it's about money. It's about the resources. It's about control. But the problem with the new colonial mentality, whether it's of Netanyahu or Trump or Biden for that matter, is that it's not based on what they used to call scientific colonialism. Let me explain. Ben-Gurion and Jefferson and Washington were smarter. They employed demographers, they employed smart people to look into how to colonize with the least possible frictions, with the maximum gain for the minimum investments, if you want, of their resources and money. The new colonialists, this breed of idiots, I call them, are about just doing it without thinking about it, without real planning, and this is going to accelerate the demise of their empires. Mm-hmm. And I think we are seeing that demise of this empire. Now, with regards to the environment, this is a very good example of this. Is the Zionist movement is actually destroying the environment for themselves. For themselves, not even, forget. Even if all the Palestinians disappeared, well, you know, there's been genocides in North America. How many nations were genocided? And in Australia, how many languages and nations were genocided and obliterated? It would be no big deal, even though I'm a member of this group called Palestinians. But I would say on the scale of what happened in other countries, we're still small, okay? So, but this is different. Why is it different? Why is it more important? And sometimes the Zionists go in a frenzy, you know, you keep focusing on Palestine. Why do you focus on Palestine? Well, first of all the media is focusing on Palestine because you guys are telling them to focus on Palestine. So, and Israel, and it's defending itself. You know, the old colonialists, they said they defended themselves, but they didn't have the vast media empire to keep telling this lie about them defending themselves. So they circled the wagons, and they did defend themselves, so to speak, against the indigenous people. We have a different thing now, because not just shooting a few indigenous people or bringing them diseases that they die with. We're talking about weapons that literally obliterate the earth. We're talking about jet flights that produce more greenhouse gases from every one jet flight over Gaza, and they did over 3 million jet flights so far. You know, from every jet flight, it produces more greenhouse gases than, I don't know, the neighborhood that we were in yesterday, was it Jamaica Plains produces in greenhouse gases from just one flight. So the world planet is suffering because of this militarism in the 21st century, which is very, very different than colonial militarism of the 19th and 18th century. Mm-hmm. Essentially, all the trees in Gaza are now destroyed, either by bombing or by literally bulldozing them with special bulldozers called D9 bulldozers. Most of them. We did a study on this by remote sensing. The greenhouse, the same thing. You see the destruction of greenhouse from North Gaza to South Gaza. North Gaza is about 97% of greenhouses are destroyed. South Gaza is still less, but that's because they are coming to South Gaza. It's so stupid sometimes. I really, I tell my Israeli counterparts when I talk to them, I tell them, do you go swim at the beach in Jaffa or Tel Aviv? They say yes. I tell them, do you know what's in that water? It's the sewage of Gaza. Sewage of Gaza, because Israel denied electricity for decades to Gaza. One hour sometimes of electricity. Of course, you cannot operate sewage treatment facilities on 1 hour a day. So the Gaza people dumped their sewage into the Mediterranean, and because of the currents from the Suez and the Mediterranean, the sewage goes up north rather than the other way around. So literally, the Israelis are swimming in the shit of Gaza because Israel took a political decision to serve Zionist agendas. When they destroyed tens of millions of local indigenous trees, and they planted only one kind of tree, the pine tree, Pinus halepensis. Now they're biting their lips, even though environmentalists, even Zionist environmentalists at the time, warned them about it. There's a guy by the name of Heinrich Mendelssohn who established the biology department at Tel Aviv University. I used to visit him in the 1970s in Tel Aviv when we could really move around. And he showed me letters he wrote to Ben Gurion in the 1950s, where he told him, why are you destroying all those indigenous trees? And why are you letting your Ministry of Agriculture and the Jewish National Fund plant pine trees? That is environmentally catastrophic. And of course, he was proven right, not only on that ground. At the time, he didn't realize, but pine trees in a dry climate are susceptible to fires. So we get these fires in the Galilee and West Jerusalem. Even a small piece of glass can start a fire. So we have more fires than ever in those pine forests that they did, like Canada Park, which is a park that's established with Canadian Jewish money in the ruins of 3 Palestinian villages that were destroyed not in 1948, but in 1968. After Israel occupied the West Bank, they demolished those 3 villages, uprooted all the trees around them, and then proceeded to plant pine trees, Jewish National Fund. This is the environmental catastrophe in our region. Palestine, or what now is called Israel, between the river and the Jordan, is one of the worst areas of the earth now in terms of environment. Sorry to say this. It's worse than even surrounding countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Syria. Syria has more environmental protection than Israel does. I can prove it to you with numbers. Okay, this is my field. So again, you know, Zionism, I mean, it goes to the same concept. Zionism lies. Steve was the one who told me this, the BLT. What was the BLT, Steve? Where are you? Say it, what is it? Yeah. That the Zionist movement is beggars, liars, and thieves. Liars is the biggest part of this. They really are lying. You know how to tell when Israeli government officials are lying? Watch their lips. If they move, they are lying.
You more or less hinted at the answer to this already, but I'll ask it explicitly. They say paradoxically, if a child has been molested, that they're more likely to go on to be a child molester. Do you think a victim of genocide is more likely to go on and commit it?
You want to answer or can I answer?
Go ahead.
Well, he has a microphone.
Look, if somebody goes in front of a judge and he had broken the arm of his child because he beat his child, is the judge going to say, well, what's your excuse? And he will say, well, because my father beat me when I was growing up. Okay? Will the judge, based on this, let him go? The answer is obvious, no. No, sorry. It is not an acceptable excuse. Even if it's true, it's not an acceptable excuse, because there's something called law and there's something called choice. In human behavior as individuals, we have a choice. And nations also have a choice, and people and movements have choices. And if they make wrong choices, they should be punished for them. Period, end of story, regardless of what they have claimed to be an excuse. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure, in the previous session that I was in, this is not true that the Zionists are victims of abuse. Most leading Zionists, the ones who organize the Zionist movement, are not Holocaust survivors or anything else. In fact, many of them were collaborators with those who oppressed them, with those who oppressed Jews. You know, the Zionist movement even signed agreements with Hitler and broke the boycott of Nazi Germany. That's why they had the Olympics in Nazi Germany in 1936, thanks a lot to the Havara Agreement and other things. So it is not true that those leaders, the political leaders, who are usually motivated by positions and by money rather than by emotions and psychology, It is not true that that's their main motivation. Maybe contribute to some of them, I would give that. But even then, as I said, it's not an excuse, and certainly in this case, as I mentioned, we Palestinians are not, are not the ones who persecuted the Jews, and so why should we pay a price of the Germans? If you hate the Germans, go make a Jewish state in Germany or somewhere else. Why do you have to come and make it in our country? This is not an acceptable discourse in international law or even in basic human psychology and human rationality. You want to add something?
Sure, I will agree. I agree with Mazin that there is always choice. So, I mean, if you, I was just reading Timothy Snyder, he wrote that little pamphlet on tyranny. He's written a lot of books. A little while back, he wrote a book called Black Earth, The Holocaust as History and Warning. It's fairly brilliant. And he points out that 5 million of the 6 million Jews who were genocided in Europe were killed not in the death factory of Auschwitz, but in villages in Ukraine and Poland and Lithuania by regular people who had been sold the idea that, who were miserable, whether they were being mistreated by the Soviet Union or by Nazi Germany, and were told that if they wanted to live and they wanted their lives to be better, they had to kill the Jews because the Jews were responsible for all their misery. That's how they were killed in the death pits, they were killed in carbon monoxide vans, and they were killed bullet by bullet. He also writes, and they were normal, regular people who were recruited. There were also people who stood up to that and made a decision to save Jews and to not compromise their own integrity and their own souls by doing that. Menachem Begin and Moshe Shamir and others who were who were the Jewish terrorists all learned their trade. They were all Poles, and they learned their trade as resistance fighters against the Soviet Union in Poland in the 30s. And they made a choice that they would continue that struggle themselves for the Zionist movement. They made bad decisions about that. So there's always choice. And I think that's why Snyder, who is very pessimistic, spends a lot of time in his book talking about those people, those righteous people. And I think we have to, there's where the hope is.
But I do want to add one thing, You have to think also of the people who persecuted the Jews. Let's say the Nazis. The Nazis can also claim that it's because they were abused. Sure. Is that a good excuse? No, of course not. As I said, people have a choice. When Ben-Gurion made a choice in 1941, conscientious Jews from Bund socialist group of Jews came to him and said, there's this flights from Eastern Europe to England to save Jewish children. And the Jewish National Fund has a lot of money. Can you give us just a few £1,000 so that we can pay for the flights? Mm-hmm. And he pounded his hand on the table. This is what he said. He said, not one penny for such a project. Because, this is his words, because if I had the chance to save all the children, meaning Jewish children in Europe, by taking them to England, and half of them by bringing them to Eretz Israel, I would choose the latter. Mm-hmm. Because we should not put the interests, this is Ben-Gurion speaking, we should not put the interests of those children ahead of the interests of the Zionist project and Jewish history. This is his words, you know. To tell me that this is a person who's reacting to persecution, if he's done one to save Jewish children, you know, this is why I say we all have choices to make. And the fact, by the way, the fact that people like Mark Braverman could come out of context, or many of you could come out of context of that and transcend that and make the right choices of supporting human rights and opposing Zionism, that tells us that it's not this incurable psychological problem of being abused and will have to be abuser, that this is just somehow a lock that you just have to do it. You know, obviously, if some people could do it, other people could do it too, could break out of that. Read Mark Ellis's book, by the way. His book is titled Out of the Ashes. Brilliant book about this particular question.
Maybe a couple more. Here's Ruby. Hi, Ruby.
Hi. A couple of points, like from way back, but this last one, I think, absolutely, that's what actually in 1970, seeing Ben-Gurion's letter, if it wasn't to build the Zionist project, let them stay there. That's the missive that got me heading over there to see what was going on. Exactly that. The thing about passed on trauma, though, I think is not an excuse. I see your point, and not only that, but it's not an excuse. It's never an excuse. You know, somebody beat you up, you beat somebody up, but it's a point of understanding. Never an excuse. You don't get off scot-free. There's responsibility as well as some motivation or whatever might have caused this. And I think, yes, those folks were not themselves Holocaust survivors at all. But there's an issue of manipulation. If you've been oppressed, if you've been traumatized, you may be more open to manipulation, and that's what happened. Not the folks that the early Zionists, they weren't the survivors, but they were able to manipulate that feeling, I think, of into being able to, into passing on the trauma. Because there's a lot of that, the passing on of trauma is so clear to me and so specific, writing numbers on arms, humiliation while filming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's so fucking specific that it feels like that, and that's not an excuse. There is responsibility, but some sort of understanding of, yeah, this is passed on. And the thing about Fortress Israel, the thing about a fortress is that the more you try to attack it, the stronger it gets. So I disagree that if you have Fortress Israel, that coming in is gonna, you have to have people inside, and there are more people inside than ever. I think you have to have people burrowing from both sides. If it's just from the outside, the fortress will get stronger and stronger. And yes, I think if 1 million people contact our so-called representatives, like, yeah, they're really representing us. But if 1 million, then they think about their jobs, and it does make a difference. And I think that's what you were talking about, Mark. 1 million people calling, they have to, it changes something.
Can I say something quickly again about choice? I think all bets are off in terms of choice right now for us in the world that we now live in. I think many of us, I'll just speak for myself, we're living in a kind of bubble. I had nothing to lose by changing my life and working for Palestine. I didn't have a job to lose at the time. So there was no courage involved. It was just a matter of what I felt strongly about in terms of my own integrity and my own sense of being connected to myself. I've been reading about the Berrigan brothers, and there are many, many other people you can read about. And I'm going to quote this in the sermon I'm going to give on Sunday. I mean, I talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You know, when he came back, he had a ticket out of Germany in 1939, and he had a nice. His friends fixed him up with a nice spot at Union Theological in New York, and he came in June, and he couldn't stand it. He knew the war was coming. He knew he needed to be back in his country with his people, and he went home a week before Germany invaded Poland. That was Bonhoeffer. Berrigan, this is Philip Berrigan, said, if you want to follow Jesus, you got to look good on wood, he said. There are crosses to pick up, and there are crosses you can get nailed onto. I would like to ask Mazin to tell the story of the choice that he made in, what was it, 2008, when you were at Yale? Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what that process was like for you, Mazin, and what that choice was.
My wife and I left the United States in 2008. We both have six-figure incomes. We want to have zero-figure income in Palestine. That was the best choices we made in our lives. And my wife would tell you the same thing if she was here. Why did we make that choice? Well, it's very simple. We live this life only once. We don't live 10 lives, we live one life. Unless you believe in reincarnation. But so what to do with our lives? We have to think about what would be useful for humanity, for the world. And while we were active when we lived in the US, and perhaps I overstayed my welcome in the US, if you want. I could have stayed. Actually, the lawyer told me, I'll get you your job back at Yale if you want. I said, no, I don't want it. I want to go back home. It was the right moment because the work in the US, being important, is still a part-time job of activism. Whereas work in Palestine, volunteering in Palestine, is a full-time activism. Even when I'm drinking water here, I'm not engaged in resistance. But when I'm drinking water in Palestine, I'm engaged in resistance. When I'm teaching children in Palestine, or when I'm doing a research in Palestine, I'm engaged in resistance because the Zionists don't want us there. So everything we do there, even when I buy a coffee from a street vendor, I'm engaged in resistance, I'm contributing to his economy. So this is why I think it was the right choice, and I've never been happier, by the way, than since in those 16 years of activism, despite the arrests and the harassments and the lack of resources and all this stuff. It still is the best choice. As I said, look, even slaves had choice. They could be house slaves or they could be field slaves. Field slaves were under the whip, The house slaves were sometimes the ones carrying the whip and whipping fellow slaves because they thought, hey, the system of slavery is the right, is perpetual and we cannot fight it. So might as well get a little better food and a little better clothes and live in the system of slavery. Everybody has a choice. I'm reading a book by this Vietnamese monk. Yeah, and it's brilliant, by the way, about mindfulness and how you can make your happiness from within your own soul and within common things that you do, like drinking or eating. And it's wonderful as a philosophy, as an idea, that we always have choices, even choice to be happy or not to be happy. Do you think the Zionists are happy? I mean, come on. Do you know what's the biggest killer of Israeli soldiers now? It's not Hamas or Hezbollah.
Suicide.
It's suicide. You know, they're not happy people. So the choice we make is important, and people can make the choice that's right for them. And God bless their souls. They want to choose to be oppressors. That's their business. I'm not going to force them to change their minds. I can only speak to people and hope that some messages transmit so that they understand that this is not good for them. The same when I speak to my cousin who died because of an overdose of alcohol and drug. I tried desperately to convince him that he was not only destructive to his wife and children, but he was self-destructive eventually. And then indeed he died from overdose. So you can only tell people what you think is the right way, and you can lead by example. And you can change only yourself. You really cannot do much more than that, but there's choices, always choices.
Let's, but one more question, but I am asked to pass this around. We depend on your help to keep this thing going. We are so thankful that Mazin and Mark have been here. We also have our own mailing list in the back, and we'd be glad to be in touch with you about just a embarrassment of riches of wonderful speakers that we have coming up and that we've had in the past that you can find on our YouTube channel. So one last question. We also have, some more advertising. We have beautiful mugs that are for sale in the back from the Gralta Foundation. And we also have Laith and Aladdin, who have a beautiful display of Palestinian products, especially carved things. I think Reverend Ashley Wiest Laird had something to do with that as well. So check out the feeding frenzy around the table in the back. And let's see. Yes.
So, I don't want to be a total downer here, but here's what I have to say. The whole world, Israel is already in trouble with the whole world. I mean, Amnesty just came out and said that they're doing, every country in the UN except the US has condemned their actions. So we really don't need to do any more behaviors that, there's no point in any behaviors that say that Israel is committing genocide or doing something bad. That this is a known fact all over the world. So I feel pretty strongly that we in the US need to be doing something different from what we're doing, because what we're doing isn't working. Basically, we're more than propping up. We're feeding this, we're feeding arms at an enormous rate into this genocide. This is a disaster. And we could stop it if we stopped doing it. It's not anything about people in Israel unclenching themselves or becoming untraumatized. The flow of arms simply has to stop. Mm-hmm. And I am interested in your thoughts, not just about how we can make day-to-day choices, but what can we really all be here doing? And it needs to be something different from what we're already doing, like not just call your congressperson. We've been there. So to not leave totally depressed, and it's okay if you say, I don't know, but I do feel like there's a synapse, like there's a leap that we need to be taking. Could be psychologically, could be spiritually, could be in terms of our activism, could be in terms of tax resistance. I don't know what it is or if it's all those things, but I'd like to hear you both address this.
I would just go back and direct you back to what Mazin just said. And I would say what he said. It's about individual choices, what we do in our own lives and in our communities. I think it's going to be more and more important here in the United States. it would be so easy for us to throw our hands up and say, oh my God, I give up, we're going down. Well, what does that mean? We have to be able to make individual choices in our lives to keep ourselves healthy, physically, spiritually, psychologically. If we lose that, then we've lost everything. And then we make choices.
I just want to add, if you want, on my own website, Qumsiyeh.org, my last name.org, right on the front page, there's what you can do. There's 76 actions that you can do, ranging from BDS to media work to lobby work, etc. So feel free to browse those. But I don't have a particular preference for a particular action. I mean, I think people do the actions they are good at. If you're, a good musician, go ahead and use music and resistance. If you're a, media person, use the media. If you're a psychologist, try to write and dissect the psychology of oppression and liberation. So I think we all do, and in my case, environmentalism, so I use my knowledge of biology to speak about the destruction of the environment and writing papers about it. So each person works in their own way. Overall strategy, I don't think exists in any historical liberation movement. It's just an accumulation of pressure. But I also want to remind you that how did the good things that happened, even in this country, which is one of the worst countries in terms of history of oppression and wars, as Martin Luther King said, our government is the biggest purveyor of violence in the world. But anyways, if you think in this country, what are the positive things that happened and how did they happen? Civil rights, women's right to vote, stopping the war in Vietnam, stopping the direct support of apartheid in South Africa, 40-hour work week, social security. All of these things happened when enough people, when Mark, you did this, what I was thinking in my mind? That's what politicians do to see where the wind is blowing from. You've got to give them a hurricane to change their views. They're not going to get inspiration from God. So we have to mobilize more and more. And if each one of you, even today when you go home, draft a letter, send it, then you have that many more letters. If each one of you speaks to a few neighbors and a few friends, you have that much more. And as the movement builds, the pressure builds, and eventually we succeed. I am, again, I don't want to delude you in thinking that as a biologist, I think we will succeed 100%. No. I even gave the probability earlier of 70-30. 70% we won't succeed, and humanity is doomed. And 30% we will succeed. And maybe I'm being too optimistic, by the way. But anyways, as Gramsci said, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. It doesn't change my behavior. I still push, and I push because that 30% is still pretty good, damn good odds, worth fighting for. So we have to fight for it, and we keep going. But of course, we discuss tactics and strategy, but this is not the meeting for that. And I'm happy to have a meeting someday where we discuss how we can improve our tactics and our strategies.
Mm-hmm. Shifra has one quick announcement.
Quick announcement. We do an open mic on Saturday, Transformation Station. It's also a salon. Anybody who wants to come, I'll send a link to the community church, or you can give me your email address. Thank you. Warren and Markey finally changed their votes. So.
Oh, wow. And what was it, about 17 more? voted along with Bernie. We need a lot more, but that's a start. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, JVP, if not now, MAPA, Community Church, Mazin, Mark. If you could all help us put some chairs against the wall.